All right, this is the first part in a series of 4 videos that will take us through culturally responsive PBIS. Because we know PBIS informs systems of support for staff, students, families, community. It's important for us to consider how this framework is culturally responsive. And we as coaches, I think, need to really think about how we can inform this work in a culturally responsive way. And so this really is an opportunity for us as a team to reflect and think about how we support our PBIS teams and how we can inform their work and so that implementation can be done in a culturally responsive way. So let's dive in. This initial quote was shared in the Cultural Responsiveness Field Guide, somewhat toward the front of it if you want to refer to it. And I really pulled it out here because I want us to think about it. And in the first discussion thread, we're going to just pull out a phrase that stands out for us. But the quote here reads, "Building responsive environments requires an understanding of how our school systems have been established, how well they support students from varying cultures, and how they can be changed to ensure the support and validation of each student." So that's a heavy quote there. And so in the first discussion, let's just share with each other what phrase or word stands out for you in that quote, and just share the reason for your choice. When we talk about culturally responsive PBIS, it brings into question the term we talk about all the time, which is equity. And we all have been talking about this quite a bit. I know we've joked about this as well because we haven't really had a definition of equity until we cast the definition that has been shared through PBIS. And so this image here really outlines a little bit of what we are thinking about when we talk about equity. They share in this graphic 4 boxes that outline what equity might mean. And so they start with inequality, that unequal access to opportunities, right? So we know groups of people aren't gaining that access. Then there's equality, where there's evenly distributed tools, resources, assistance, right? But still, some don't have access. And then there's equity, right? Where there are some tools and resources that identify and address this inequality. So now maybe people now have some sort of access, right? But then here's this last image that brings into question the concept of justice. So fixing the system to offer equal access to both those tools, resources, opportunities, right? So we actually fix the system, which is why our work has been so critical and why we have felt the responsibility that we carry in this work and why it has felt so heavy, because we are informing systems. We aren't just bringing access and speaking to supports. Many times we are speaking about the core systems, and that is some important work we're engaged in. And because that work is so important, these questions are going to be really critical for us to think about. So I want to start first with our taking the time to listen to Kent McIntosh in this video here. And so in this video, he talks about the foundation of what does it mean to enhance equity of PBIS through cultural responsiveness. And so he really outlines the field guide that we're going to be diving into through these videos and sharing with each other about. And so just take a minute to watch this video. If you want to skip through it, do what you want with it, but it's a very good opportunity for us here to gain some initial knowledge around the cultural responsiveness field guide and understand it from the perspective of those who created it. It's about an hour, so let's take our time to watch this video. When you're done with the video, we'll be reflecting around this particular discussion question. What resonates with you as you watch that video, and then what question do you still have? Feel free to share anything else you want to in these discussion threads. Of course, you know how we communicate with each other and collaborate all the time. Feel free to ask any questions or share anything else as you move through these videos that stands out to you, but just provided some discussion questions that we can start with as we reflect on this video. All right, so the learning objectives as we move through these 4 videos here and dive into the cultural responsiveness field guide are: 1, to really define and understand cultural responsiveness within the PBIS framework. So just gain an initial knowledge of that. understand the key components. So learning those 5 components of culturally responsive Tier 1 PBIS implementation. And so once we understand those 5 components, understand how each of the Tier 1, those 15 Tier 1 TFI features align with those 5 components of culturally responsive PBIS. And then consider together as a team our next steps. How can we plan for future PBIS teamwork to support culturally responsive implementation and what that might look like? So that'll be some time for us to kind of collaborate and think about what might be some next steps and what would be some effective ways to move forward with this knowledge to support our PBIS teams. So this is all about that cultural responsiveness field guide, along with some other field guides that they have put together through OSEP. And so you might want to either print out the cultural responsiveness field guide and just have it beside you as we collaborate together and learn together, or you can just have it up on the computer as you look at this video. But either way, you're going to probably want to refer back to it because I have not shared all of the details that are in this field guide. I've just pulled out some highlighted pieces for us to reflect on. And so you might want to dive in and read a little bit more. But the primary goal of cultural responsiveness within a PBIS framework is to use PBIS principles to change school cultures and systems to enhance educational equity. That has always been the goal. And because contextual fit is that core principle, right, where we know that we are implementing with our communities in mind and why it's so unique at every school, because we understand this, we know that PBIS is not fully implemented until it is culturally responsive. And so this isn't just about adding a piece to PBIS implementation. This is just our understanding of how to make sure our PBIS implementation is culturally responsive in and of itself, right? And so in order to do that, let's look at what the field guide defines as cultural responsiveness. You know, we've talked about this in our division quite often, but they're pretty explicit about what it means as they state in the field guide. And it's 3 pieces to cultural responsiveness. It's about holding high expectations for all students, using students' cultures and experiences to enhance their learning, and then providing all students with access to effective instruction and adequate resources for learning. And when they refer to effective instruction, it's not just academic instruction, but also some of that other social emotional instruction and behavioral instruction as well. So students having that full equitable access. So third discussion, just think about those 3 goals we just talked about, those 3 goals just shared that define cultural responsiveness. Were those 3 goals achieved for you during your K through 12 educational experience? So just think about your personal experience. Were those 3 goals achieved for you? Okay, so let's talk about the goal of cultural responsiveness within the PBIS framework. The definition within PBIS includes the following core components. So this is going to be a key piece as we move through this learning. It's composed of identity, voice, supportive environment, situational appropriateness, and data for equity. So these are those 5 core components. And so as we go through, we're going to take some time to really define each of these 5 components first so that we have a full understanding of what each one means before we then start aligning those TFI features with each of these core components. So let's look at identity to start. So to make systems more culturally responsive, school staff need an awareness and that understanding of their own personal cultures and values, as well as how those cultures and values impact their classroom and school environment. So it starts from that understanding of ourselves and how our own cultures and values do impact our students and our environments around us, right? So it starts with ourselves and our own self-awareness, and that projection of personal cultures and values onto our environments can either engage or disengage students and families served by the school. So having that awareness of how that interacts. And to increase engagement, school staff must actively seek not only to understand their own cultural identities, but understand and validate the values of students, families, and communities they serve. So it's that 2-part piece, not only understanding our students and our communities, but really having an awareness of yourself. So you saw this video that was shared by Kent McIntosh in the video, and you saw this chart that reflected an activity that can be engaged in with staff to really explore personal identity here. And so I want to take time for us to use this chart to reflect. So let's look at the last row. Let's look at appropriate response to insults and what our views might have been around this. So let's take some time in the fourth discussion thread to respond to appropriate response to insults. So think about and share, what were your values growing up around how to appropriately respond to insults? What are your values now? What does your school value? And you can choose one of your schools, any one of your schools that you serve. Think about, what does your school value about this particular belief of appropriate response to insults? And then how might the students and families be different from what your school values? And how might this difference possibly create conflict? So let's kind of fill out that last row of that chart, just reflecting, starting from ourselves and moving into one of our schools and their students and families as well. Okay, second component is voice, and it involves authentic family or community engagement that includes providing family, students, and community members with meaningful opportunities to be heard and voice their opinions, as well as exercising leadership within the school system. And so we know how important that is, because we always talk about student, family, and community involvement, but really thinking about how they can have leadership within that system. And then students and families should have opportunities to see themselves as well as their cultural values and their histories in the school setting. So think about your own personal experience in this fifth discussion question. What was this your family's experience at your elementary school? So in reading what the definition of voice is, was that your family's experience when you were in elementary school? And in your experience as an educator now, when have you observed families being offered meaningful opportunities to be heard, voice their opinions, or exercise leadership within the school system? Okay, let's look at supportive environment. In a supportive environment, staff understand that their obligation is to meet students' needs and teach students necessary or missing skills, including the use of the acknowledgement system to reinforce new behaviors, rather than assuming students already know them. So we know this belief, we talk about it all the time in all of our professional learning, that we don't assume students already know expectations, we teach it, right? And so staff understand that school expectations exist as a framework to teach desired behavior to fluency, right? We talk about that all the time, rather than a system through which infractions are delivered. Staff must also understand that the acknowledgement system is intended as a tool to encourage learning, generalization of desired behaviors, and when behaviors occur, staff understand the need to teach those desired behaviors, right? So this is a core piece that we train around with professional learning. We're not assuming students understand what our expectations are, right? And so we teach them. That's that core assumption of PBIS that we always share. And lastly, students in a supportive environment feel valued. So in this discussion question number 6, let's reflect on how our schools have implemented their school-wide matrix. So choose 2 of your schools that you work with and share whether you believe they have used the school-wide matrix as a framework to teach desired behavior to fluency, or as a system through which infractions are delivered. And so even though we might not understand all of the elements of what our schools do, let's reflect around 2 of them and think about how they've done this at their schools.